To a reflective observer, there has been considerable evidence in recent years that many Americans have no confidence either in the religious beliefs they profess or in the principles upon which their country was founded. Not that they say so, of course. They say precisely the opposite. But there is no ring of conviction in their voices, and most else that they say runs contrary to their nervous protestations of continuing fealty. They want to conform, and they want everyone else to conform to what they deem to be conventional standards. If there are those who refuse to conform, and especially if they show promise of progressing in their nonconformity, these conventional-minded people become apprehensive and afraid. It is as though they were saying, we must all unitedly believe in Santa Claus, or else there may not be a Santa Claus. So shaky are they about the reality of what they are asserting. They would not want to admit it, but the inference is clear. If what they adhere to were genuinely examined, it would not stand the test. So there must be no examination. I say that this is so of religious beliefs and also of the principles upon which the United States was founded. So far as apprehension is concerned, the two go much together. But I shall begin with the founding principles. One of these is certainly the freedom to debate, including free expression for unconventional opinions. If this freedom had not been zealously affirmed, there could have been no American Revolution. For certainly the whole idea of such a revolution was, to say the least, profoundly unconventional. I am not saying that the founding fathers were all of them and at all times entirely happy about it, but they recognized that freedom of debate was fundamental to all their other principles. The experiment upon which they were embarking demanded that opinion of every kind be heard, and their expectation was that in the public forum the most desirable opinions would prevail. But even if for a time an undesirable opinion were ascendant, they knew that the alternative, the suppression of opinions which a ruling group disliked, would turn out infinitely worse. This was the very tyranny against which the colonies had revolted, this and all that proceeded from it. It is true that in the final years of the 18th century, there was the period of the Alien and Sedition Acts when freedom of opinion was viciously restricted, and I am sorry to say that this was under the administration of a Unitarian, President John Adams, who, however, became a somewhat better Unitarian after his retirement from office. Too late, no doubt, to do the country much good. But in any case, Unitarian resources were not exhausted. Under the administration of another Unitarian, Thomas Jefferson, who succeeded Adams, the Alien and Sedition Act phase was ended, and freedom of opinion was considerably entrenched. It had been established as a basic freedom in 1791 in the Bill of Rights. There had been prolonged discussion of it. Those who established it knew what they were doing. They recognized that it was, among other things, freedom in religious belief, and that this meant not only the liberty to believe, but also the liberty to disbelieve. And it was not expected that you would keep quiet about it, unless this were your preference. But times have changed, and men are timid grown. Not that anyone is thrown in jail for disbelief, although I think this too would happen in some places were it not for the Constitution. But pressures of every other sort are brought upon us to conform. As I said at the beginning, people do not have confidence in their country's founding principles. They regard them as very fine principles, no doubt about that, which it is safer, so far as possible, not to rely upon in practical affairs. I was much interested some few years ago in a newspaper report about an attempt by an organization called the Freethinkers of America to persuade the city of Providence, Rhode Island, to accept without cost the $75,000 statue of Tom Paine, the pamphleteer and crusader for freedom of our revolutionary days, the man indeed who is credited with saving the American Revolution. In the darkest hour, when even Washington himself was close to despair, Paine wrote the tracts that put new courage into the armies and reinforced their leaders. There is not, I think, much doubt of the importance of the role Paine played. Certainly, there was no doubt in the mind of Washington. Paine was an outstanding champion of liberty, none more so, and from the American standpoint, a foremost patriot. But the mayor of Providence, Rhode Island, did not want the statue. Paine, he said, is too controversial a character. The notion that the city might provide a site for the placement of the statue was out of the question. This in a state founded by Roger Williams, and a state that was much encouraged by Paine himself during its time of sufferings, which were considerable at the time of the Revolution. The statue to Paine was unveiled in Paris many years ago. He was important in the French Revolution as well as the American. But no statue in Rhode Island. Why? There is nothing, said the mayor of Providence, directed toward Mr. Paine's person, character, or philosophy, but rather toward the varying opinion of Paine held by others. And what is the reason for this varying opinion? It is that there are people who look upon Paine's writings as anti-Christian, which, so far as dogmatic Christianity is concerned, they surely were. But what about the foundational principles? Can a patriot not disbelieve the conventional dogmas and still be a great American? If the truth were told, as it seldom is, about Washington himself, he also would be counted controversial. He too did not believe the dogmas. He was not a communicant. He went seldom to church, and when he did, it was usually because his office as president seemed to require it. In that case, to use his own whimsical words, he went to the Presbyterian meeting in the forenoon and Romish church in the afternoon. But he himself was a deist, believing that the universe had a divine architect, but that we know very little about him. He was too discreet to talk much about religion, but even so, he was labeled an infidel. What are we doing then with all these statues of Washington in every city? Why this portrait of him on our dollar bills? I will tell you why. His disbelief has been hush-hushed. There is no talk about his religion, and besides, there is no getting away from it. He was the father of his country. Nevertheless, as surely as did Paine, Washington exercised his right to disbelieve. So did Franklin. So did Jefferson, the founding fathers. So a half-century later did Lincoln. In his day, atheism did not take the conventional side. Later, he came to believe in God, but not in the Christian doctrines. He went to church as a humble worshiper, but not as a convinced believer. He, too, felt free to disbelieve. But poor Tom Paine, he published what he thought. And so, no matter how much he saved the revolution, or how clearly the founding principles represent him and protect him, he cannot have a statue. Not even one that costs the city nothing in Providence, Rhode Island. He is too controversial. What are people afraid of? I remember that back in August 1948, the Federal Communications Commission, relying upon American founding principles, directed that broadcasting stations should sell time to atheists if they wanted it, to argue the case for their disbelief. A certain Robert Harold Scott had tried to do this in California, but had been denied the right. So he petitioned the Federal Communications Commission to revoke the licenses of the broadcasting stations on the ground that they were allowing religious belief to be widely and freely disseminated from their studios, but they were not allowing any opportunity whatever for rebuttal. He was a peaceful man, said Mr. Scott. He did not throw stones at church windows. He did not mock at people kneeling in prayer. He respected every man's right to have and to express any religious belief whatsoever. But he abhorred and denounced those who, while asserting this right for themselves, sought in one way or another to prevent others from expressing contrary views. The FCC thought that Mr. Scott's case was eminently fair. No principle, said the Commission, is more embedded in our Constitution than that of religious freedom, and such a freedom necessarily carries with it freedom to disbelieve. And freedom of speech means freedom to express disbeliefs as well as beliefs, which, if you understand the American Constitution at all and believe in it, is transparently obvious. But it got the FCC into trouble. A special committee of Congress made an investigation and described the reasoning of the FCC as dangerous and mischievous, and advised the Commission to conform to the rules of ordinary decency and the sensibilities of a listening public. In other words, the Commission was told to ignore the founding principles and the Constitution, and to allow only what conventional and timid people wanted. I remember that at the time this occurred, I defended the Commission publicly, which caused a good many people to feel surprised, not to say dismayed. They wrote me letters. Why would a minister protect the rights of an atheist? The implication of the American founding principles that the rights of any or the rights of all was entirely lost upon these people. You were supposed to defend only what you agreed with. And a minister, how could he defend an atheist? Surely his business is to defend his God, which struck me, and still strikes me, as delightfully quaint. What sort of God must it be who trembles in his heaven at the broadcast voice of an atheist? What meaning could there be for me in a God whose existence depended upon my defending it? Have people so little faith in their religious convictions that they fear their loss if someone is permitted to attack them? The answer, apparently, must be yes. Or why are they so frightened? A person who is confident of what he believes is not afraid of debate. Indeed, it is through debate, either with others or within his own mind, that he has arrived at what he believes. Moreover, if he is wrong in some respect, he is willing and even eager to know what it is. He realizes that another man's freedom of opinion is important not only to the other man, but also to himself. It is through discussion and disputation that we should test our opinions. It is in a free forum that we should discover the substantiality of our beliefs. For if anything is certain, it is that reality, whatever is really so, will remain what it is, no matter what we believe about it. If there is a God, disbelief cannot destroy him. If there is not a God, no amount of belief can create him. If then a person truly believes in God, as I do, though not in a conventional form, he will not be worried in the least if others differ from him. He will certainly hope to persuade them, but he will not suppose for one moment that the way to persuade them is to silence them. On the contrary, let there be debate. I was much amused, and something more than amused, a few years ago, at a dinner I attended at Chicago University. It was a dinner in honor of the new dean of the Federated Theological Faculty. Several people spoke, as is usual on such occasions, and they said just about the right things, I mean the appropriate things, which is also fairly customary. One of the speakers, however, and it was he who really commanded my attention, was a student, chosen to represent all the students who were studying theology. and he told us something of the bewilderments that had beset him as he passed from phase to phase in his theological education. But a time came, he said, when an immensely reassuring thought emerged from his perplexity. It was this: no matter what the theologians say, God will remain just exactly what he is, and the theologians can't do anything about it. I say I was amused and more than amused, for beneath my laughter was my recognition that this man had groped his way to something important. His reassuring thought was genuine. He had been worrying about God, lest this theologian be right and another wrong, as though God could only be what a theologian thought he was. If the student's favorite theologian were worsted in an argument, there went God. If the theologian in a later bout did somewhat better, then God came limping back. But this, the young man finally discovered, was all absurd. God was not the construct of a theologian's mind. God was God, and whatever God really is, that he remains, and the thing to do is to try to discover what you can through your own thinking and your own experience, which is true not only in theology, but in everything. Reality is reality, and in the end, no amount of baseless belief can protect you from it, nor yet can disbelief. What you need to do is to find out what is real, and for that purpose, debate should be open and free. It is vital that belief be challenged. Only so can we know how substantial it is, how much it accords with reality. As for the assumption that religion is maintained by believers and damaged by disbelievers, it is not supported by the facts. If there had not been disbelievers who took issue with prevailing views, we would still be primitive in religion. The advance of religion owes as much to the doubter as to the believer. Because he doubted existing beliefs, the way was found to better beliefs, which would not have been possible if there had not been disbelievers. Even Orthodox Christianity could not have emerged if there had been no disbelief in the systems that preceded it. And here we should remember the dramatic fact that in the early Christian centuries, Roman officialdom called the Christians atheists. They thought that that was what they were, quite simply because they did not believe in the gods that in the Roman Empire were conventional. Even the Orthodox Christian should therefore pay some heed to the right of a disbeliever. The right, yes, and the value. But there is the other side of the coin as well. The believer does not always maintain religion. He maintains at times the beliefs that disguise the absence of religion. A system of belief can become an empty husk. It can usurp the place of live religion. Can it possibly be contended that all of those who accept conventional beliefs are bringing forth what Jesus called the fruits of religion? And can it be contended, on the other hand, that disbelievers are all bad men? He had nothing, said the mayor of Providence, against the person or character of Tom Paine. No, it was just that he had become controversial, because in certain respects he was a disbeliever. And so it often is. And why does a disbeliever become so controversial? Why does he offend what the Congressional Committee called the rules of ordinary decency and the sensibilities of the listening public? I will tell you. In this respect, the so-called rules of ordinary decency are the hypocrisies that cover up the emptiness that people do not want to see. The sensibilities of the public are the anxious fears that they may have to face reality. The disbeliever is disliked because he reveals not only his own disbelief, but the disbelief of those who pretend to be believers. He opens shutters in rooms that people want to keep dark. He lets in daylight upon dreams that thereupon evaporate. And people are afraid. They are afraid as citizens, and they are afraid as churchgoers. of having to face reality. They're even afraid of good, afraid of being good. The political nonconformist who wants a better life for his fellows, who believes in justice and in extending righteousness, is dangerous because he lets the light in and makes us see what is so. The thing to do with him, therefore, is to make him out to be subversive, even though he has no treasonable or communist sympathies whatsoever, and not in the least to protect his rights as granted by the Constitution. The religious disbeliever who wants to get at the truth about man and God because he thinks that truth is vital is dangerous because he shows how flimsy are the dogmas and the creeds. So the thing to do with him is to call him controversial and offensive to the rules of ordinary decency. It is not that the people who would enforce these so-called rules really believe in conventional religion, but they are fearfully scared that they may come face to face with real religion. Real religion, for instance, would mean fairness in giving an opponent his opportunity. But suppose he used it well. Suppose he pointed out that religion in its essence is better served by honesty and righteousness than by believing in a fantasy and practicing pieties. Here is something to be feared. Not that people would put it that plainly. Perhaps they couldn't. They are not thought through, but they sense it. True religion, like our founding principles, requires that the rights of the disbeliever be equally acknowledged with those of the believer. And true religion goes farther. It says that there is nothing to be feared from anything whatever that comes from anywhere at all into an honest mind. The one thing to fear is the mind's dishonesty. Yes, and it says that the true believer who has forged his convictions in his own experience, testing them with his intellect, following them in his life until they are a part of his own reality, attuned to the reality of all he knows, will be afraid of nothing except betrayal of the truth within him. Argue him out of his religion? Not until argument can drive the sun from the sky, or change the courses of the stars, or wash the color from the pageant of the seasons. Belief is many things, and so is disbelief. But religion is something that happens to a man when he opens his mind to truth, and his conscience to justice, and his heart to love, and nothing can take it away.